The last year hasn't exactly been kind to our individual freedom or the free market. We've seen massive bailouts for foolish behavior in the financial and automotive sectors. We've seen the federal government setting pay levels. We've seen Washington try to borrow and spend its way out of a recession with nothing to show for it but double-digit unemployment and nearly $1 trillion in new debt. And we've seen Congress and the White House propose to commandeer the health sector and energy sector. Despite this regulatory assault, or perhaps because of it, Americans, by a 60 to 40% margin, say that government is doing too much rather than should do more, according to Gallup. But if you think it can't get worse, you're wrong. Next up on the government's takeover list is the Internet, one of the most prosperous and most innovative sectors of the American economy. Last week, the Federal Communications Commission commenced the process toward imposing so-called net neutrality regulations. Put simply, net neutrality would put the federal government in the business of regulating Internet service delivery. Federal regulators claim that this is an attempt to preserve a free and open Internet. But if they're willing to acknowledge that the Internet is free and open now, then why does the government need to get involved? Proponents of net neutrality claim the regulations are needed to prevent Internet service providers from discriminating against certain kinds of content. But that argument doesn't hold much water. For example, consider one of the favorite examples of those who favor net neutrality. Last year, Comcast decided to slow download speeds for files accessed with a peer-to-peer system called BitTorrent. Critics of Comcast immediately cried foul, but it was nothing more than a sound business decision. The huge downloads from BitTorrent meant that 5% of Comcast users were consuming 70% of the company's bandwidth, slowing down Internet speeds for all its users. Comcast simply decided that it was going to have a hard time keeping customers happy if they had to spend too long staring at an hourglass. In the end, Comcast and BitTorrent brokered an agreement without government intervention. But even if they hadn't, consumers would have been free to shop among other service providers who offered quicker download times. The controversy didn't reflect a failure of the free market. If anything, it proved how market forces ultimately benefit consumers. The implications of net neutrality go well beyond these sorts of technical questions, however. With government in control of the Internet, the private companies who have invested hundreds of billions of dollars and fueled the web's incredible growth will have their incentives to invest in new technology and next-generation high-speed networks handicapped. And as always occurs when government gets involved in something, tech companies will begin lobbying regulators to put their competitors at a disadvantage. And worst of all, net neutrality will result in slower Internet service and perhaps even a catastrophic crash. But the single biggest threat that net neutrality poses is giving the government an opening to rein in one of the healthiest sectors of American life. The Internet is the world's largest great town square, where every viewpoint is welcome and everyone is free to compete in the battle of ideas. Net neutrality could change all that, leading to what is essentially a fairness doctrine for the Internet and threatening fundamental principles of free speech. With all the problems in Washington now, it's amazing that government would focus on fixing an Internet sector that works just fine the way it is. The Internet doesn't need neutrality, and it doesn't need a fairness doctrine. It just needs what has always made it work: freedom. That's this week's Freedom Minute.